everyone, and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm going to show you how to make a really cool card using Technique Junkies stamps, your vintage set of 4, and vintage French advertisements. So let's get into it. We're working with the August release of Technique Junkies. I love this release. It's so cool. These vintage French advertisements are awesome. You could do them as a whole like we're going to do, or you can cut them out as backgrounds. And these really cool vintagey sentiments, and I'm going to be using the just a note portion. So, and we're also going to use, I'm going to use this moth die cut. I'm going to be using some Shimmering Bliss in Smoldering Ash, and I'm going to be using some sticky specks because I'm going to double layer up on that moth. And then I'm going to be using a Bristol Smooth cardstock to stamp my image on, and I'll be using various distress ink sprays. If you don't have distress ink sprays, you can use any kind of ink to color in the background. But first I have to stamp the background out. So I'm going to get out my stamping platform, and I'm just going to lay it on this sticky mat. Pull out my stamp and just lay it on top of there. It doesn't matter if it's right side up or upside down because it's a background. So I'm just going to kind of place it, and I'm going to make sure there aren't any bubbles. And I'll go ahead and stamp this out with some VersaFine Clair. I just love this set. Every stamp, there's some really funny ones, and there's some, you know, more serious sort of grungy ones. And so you'll see a lot of videos from me for this month. And you can see that I got into my Chucky tool and I had to replace the chocolate, but now it's not sealed. So I might eat those chocolates too. So I'm happy with the way that's stamped out. Again, it doesn't have to be perfectly black or clear, you know, even clear, because it is a background, but it's such a cool background. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just heat set that a little bit because I don't want my ink to smear. And I'm going to use watercolor paper to cut out this butterfly. And I use the smooth side of one and the bumpy side of the other because I want the bumpy side up to give me more texture. So I'll use my sticky specks and go ahead and just basically you just open up the little plastic cover, and these specks are on the orange or yellow side, however you like to see that. And I want to make sure I grab the right one because I want the bumpity one on top. And I'm just going to lay them down on here and burnish them down really good. Take my bone folder and burnish down a little bit more, and this stuff is super sticky, so you could also cut out, you could glue it, you could cut out the butterfly with already some tape on it. Oops, sorry about that, dropped my iPad. That's not very smart. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this moth off of here, and I've got him off, and now I'm just kind of lining him up with the body, and then I'll lay the wing down over the top and just kind of carefully matching up the edges. And this is just one thing. You could use any kind of die cut or no die cut, or, you know, a ephemera piece, whatever you want, but I wanted to use this moth because I think he's cool. All right, so I've got my moth ready. Now I've got my little sort of splat box out, and I'm going to spray my moth down with some Black Soot Distress ink. And you could just ink that up with regular ink if you wanted to. And then I'm going to go over the top with Smoldering Ash. And you don't see it real well while it's wet, but wait till this thing dries. It is the coolest metallic look ever. So I'm going to go ahead and dry that off, and I'll show it to you once it's been dried. So that's all dried off, and so now it looks like cool metal. And then I'm going to go ahead, while I've got my box out, and I'm going to go ahead and just start adding color. So I've got antique linen, I've got pumice stone, I've got, frayed burlap. Use any colors you want. I've got some rusty hinge, and then finally some vintage photo, and then I'm happy with it. So it just looks old and old. So it looks old, and I make sure I dry that off real well. And I'm going to trim off the edges with my decal trimmer. So I'm going to trim it down to 4 by 5 1/4. And then I'm going to do something really neat with the edges. You're going to love it. All right, getting that trimmed down. Now I want to get out my mat here because I'm going to be spraying onto something, and I'm going to dip the card in. So I'm going to first spray just some of my black soot ink, and then I'm going to spray the Smoldering Ash, and I'm just going to kind of drag the card edges through that wet muck, and it gives a really super cool effect. So it kind of soaks into the card. So that's done and dry, and I'm happy with that. It kind of looks burnt and old and metally and just cool. And I want to just make sure those edges are dry for the next step. All right, so I'm going to drip a little water on here and set that aside for a second. And the water is just to give it a little bit more texture. And then what I need to do is I need to cut out a piece of vellum to go behind my little moth. So I'm just tracing around the vellum kind of roughly, you know, best I can, but it's, you know, some people trace better than others. And I'm trying to get the head, and I realize that my pencil lead is empty. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, and you want to make sure you're cutting under the lines instead of over. All right, I've got that cut out. Now I'm going to take my alcohol ink, and I use the latte for this method. And I just take a little bit, and I want to put that back down on a mat because I really don't feel like getting alcohol ink all over my cutting mat. So I just take a tiny bit and then just rub it around on there. And that'll kind of age the vellum. Yeah, it looks really cool when you put it behind that moth. I don't know, something about brown and black. I love the combination. So we've got that ready, and it looks weird right there, but see, once you glue this moth down to it, it looks super cool. So I'm just going to add some glue, you know, around multiple edges of the moth. Just want to make sure that it gets good and stuck down, but you don't have to have glue everywhere. And this, I use my reptile adhesive for this. Well, you know, I use it for just about everything. I've tried other adhesives and they're okay too, but this is just my tried and true. I trust it 100%. All right, we've got that glued down. And then I'm just going to take a paper towel and dab up any that might have oozed out. The glue dries clear, so it's not a huge deal. And then kind of decide where I want to place him on the card. But I want to kind of cover up that white and trim off any excess vellum. I'm not worried about the other side because most of that's going to get trimmed off anyway. And I'm going to take just a black, this is an alcohol marker, and just kind of go along any place that looks white so that I can have some continuity with my sort of metallic look. That Smoldering Ash is such a cool Shimmering Bliss. I love it. I know Pat recommended it one time. She's like, you'll love this. You have to get it. And so I did, and yep, I love it. So I decided my placement, and I'm going to go ahead and just glue this guy down. And again, just doesn't have to be everywhere, but just enough spots so that he'll stick down. He or she, I don't know. I don't know how you would tell. But anyway, I don't know if they're like birds. All right, got him laid down. Just give him a good smush. And then I'm just going to take my scissors and trim off the excess right there. And that part is just about done. So I'm going to kind of just rough up these metallic sort of burnt looking edges because I want them to look funky and aged. And I'm going to set that aside, and I'm grabbing another piece of watercolor paper. And the reason I'm using watercolor is because it frays really nicely. And I'm going to trim that down to just under 5 1/2 by just under 4 1/4. And I like to use my decal trimmer because it helps in the next step. So a lot of people have those little, they're thread cutters is what they are. Tim Holtz makes it, but I just use scissors. And I just like to scrape all the edges and just really rough them up. with the edge of my scissors. And then it just sort of, it almost gives it almost like a cloth type effect on watercolor, because watercolor has so many layers in it. So when you get that roughed up, it looks really cool. And then I like to just make sure and I pull all the rough edges towards the front of the panel. And once I've got that done, I'm going to use my walnut stain ink, and I'm going to ink all around it. So that gives it more of an antique-y look. And then I'm going to go ahead and place this card panel down on top of that panel. Get that glued down, and now we'll get to work on our sentiment piece. And we're going to do the sentiment also on some vellum. So I'm going to grab my piece of vellum, and I've got the scrap from the butterfly and my stamp platform. And I'm just going to trim out what I need of the vellum. And I made it a little extra big just in case, but I know that I'm going to want to trim either side of the sentiment. I'm just going to lay the sentiment down onto my vellum, then pick it up, and I'm going to just put this anti-static powder on, and then I'm using black Versamark ink. And I'm going to stamp once lightly, not too heavy, or you'll get real weird mushies. And then I'm going to just pull this out, and I'm going to coat that with clear embossing powder. And my heat tool is heating up on the side, because you want your heat tool nice and hot so it doesn't warp the vellum. And we'll go ahead and get this embossed. I just love, 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 love that font. It's just so cool. All right, so I've got that done, and now all I need to do is kind of trim it down. And I'm just going to wipe it off here a little bit, and I'm going to grab my decal trimmer again and trim this down. You want to make sure that your embossing powder is cooled off before you start this step, because otherwise it'll lift, sort of. I'm just going to trim it almost to the edge of the words. And I'm going to kind of look at placement, and I see that I'm going to put it right about there. So I want to cut off the one edge here, because I'm making this in sort of a flag style. So it's not going to be glued all the way down. And I'm going to take my same alcohol ink stamping pad or whatever, and just add a little bit of alcohol to it, and just sort of lightly age this piece of vellum. Not going too heavy with it. And if you need more, get more. It's fine. So I like the way that is. I'm going to just fold this over, and I'm going to glue down the back. But I'll show you what happens when you do that and you've got the fold. Your flag likes to pop up a little bit much for my taste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke a hole, and I'm going to put a little, what are these things called? Me and forgetting the names of things. These things. Yeah. That thing right there. I can't think of the name of it to save my life. And that kind of helps it sit down. So all I'm going to do now is glue that down to a black card base, and we'll be just about done with this card. I will go ahead and just kind of go around the edge of that vellum piece just to give it a little bit more interest and depth. You can barely even see it. Well, there we go. I've got it glued down to a black card base, and this is the card. I hope you like it. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And visit Technique Junkies for this stamp and many more. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.